All right, now we look at some of the complications from chronic alcohol consumption, and the list just goes on from cancer all the way down to sleep disturbances. This is not also just limited to alcohol consumption. It can also be attributed to a variety of illicit drug use, but organ damage, cardiovascular diseases and effects, diabetes, fetal alcohol syndrome. That's very common with women who consume alcohol during their pregnancy, impotency, and infertility for both men and women, diminished immunity. So if you get sick, you may not be able to fight off diseases as much. And that has a direct impact if you're pregnant, because if you can't fight off infections and diseases, your child is more likely to not be able to fight that off as well. And you could end up miscarrying or delivering a child who has some severe birth defects. Alcoholism. This is something that's very prevalent in the United States, and we've seen the numbers and degrees of underage drinking and underage smoking. These are some warning signs, and trust and believe, I have heard it all, because drug and alcohol abuse are usually found in pairs. They're kind of brother and sister. They go along well with one another. And when we have individuals who have problems with alcohol consumption, I have heard this on numerous occasions. I'm not an alcoholic. I just like to drink. I can stop whenever I want to. Every alcoholic says that. Every single alcoholic that I have ever known has said some version or some variation of those two statements. And there are more, but these are some of the telltale signs. Having 5 or more drinks per day. And when I say 5 or more drinks, I mean 5 regular sized drinks, not one drink in a gigantic glass and you count that as one. 5 or more drinks per day. When you're drinking in the morning, that's a huge sign. I know an individual who wakes up drinking a 6-pack of Bud Light Lime. Denial of an alcohol problem. You have to admit that there's a problem in order to get help. You know, these lists just go on and on. They often suffer from depression, paranoia, anxiety. This is common. A lot of times they can't remember what happens, especially if there's a blackout periods because you've drunk so much that you passed out. That also paves the way with drug abuse when you pass out to sexual abuse for women. And I know you guys are probably familiar with the case of Brock Turner, the little jerk, demon-possessed individual who decided that he was going to sexually assault a woman who was passed out behind the dumpster at her college. Now, I want to be explicitly clear that there is no fault placed whatsoever on the woman. She could have been as drunk and as high as she wanted to be, laying butt naked on the side of the road, and nobody still should have touched her. So it was still his fault. My point is this. If I know that there's a thief in my neighborhood, I'm going to lock my door. If I know that there is a thief who is stealing cars, I'm going to lock my car doors. So we know that, unfortunately, the numbers of sexually abused women, we went over that chapter already, they're sky high. It is just massive. And these are only the numbers that are reported. We know that there is a problem with sexual assault and physical assault towards women. And one of the things we can do to protect ourselves is to limit the amount of alcohol consumption that we intake, and also to really be careful about how much we drink out in public, especially if we are drinking in excess to the point where we're going to pass out, because we may not be able to recall what happens to us, but our body actually understands trauma. Even if we weren't conscious for that to happen, we still experience trauma in other ways. And so that's going to be important for women when it comes to preserving not only our physiological health, but also our physical health and our mental health that's directly attributed to that. Alcohol use and gender differences. So we know that men can metabolize alcohol faster than women because they're larger, they have larger lungs, etc. And that's why they can have 2 drinks and we can have 1 and they'll still be under the legal limit. So the weight that you are, the size and height that you are, all of these impact your alcohol's metabolism, and we can pretty much metabolize a drink every 1 to 2 hours. Our hormones also affect our alcohol metabolism. Not as much always, but alcohol consumption can really have negative impacts on our pregnancy because of the fluctuating hormones as well. But the biggest difference really is that the smaller you are and the lighter you are, the less you can drink. And when you're pregnant, you have a huge difference in the amount of really of any alcohol that you can drink when you're pregnant, because everything that you consume, your unborn child also consumes. Now I want to talk about some illicit drugs, and this is where some interesting information really comes into play. There are stimulants, depressants, cannabis, psychedelics, narcotics, inhalants, designer drugs. You can combine some of these things to get like Cocoa Puff. You can get, something called, Snow that's also mixed with heroin you can mix drugs to your heart's content. But one of the things that I want to be really clear on are some of the stimulants that we really don't know about. Caffeine is actually a stimulant, and in taken in excess, you can have heart rate can increase significantly, go into cardiac arrest. So caffeine is actually a drug. Cocaine is a drug. It's a stimulant, but so are amphetamines, methamphetamines. You may have commonly heard of speed, smart pills, beanies. They're orange footballs. There's a lot of different things that they're called, but methamphetamine is speed. And I want to be real clear right here too. The drugs that they prescribe for ADD and for ADHD are 95% methamphetamines. It's literally almost the exact same thing chemically. Almost the exact same thing. And this is why these drugs are really kind of abused heavily, especially in the college sector, where Ritalin and what's the other one called? I can't recall off the top of my head, but Ritalin is a drug that they give for ADHD. And this is something that an Adderall, that's what the other one is. These are basically, it's like methamphetamine. It's basically speed. They are heavily abused because they give you real good focus. Just like some people say marijuana makes them more creative in the studio or more creative with their work if they're artists. So these are actually stimulants. They can keep you up for a really long time. You can lose weight on them. There's a reason why many drug addicts, many crackheads are very, very skinny, because you can stay up for long periods, days on end. You can stay up and not eat anything the entire time because they act as appetite suppressants as well. So we have to be careful with these. And depressive drugs are also heavily abused because depression is very real for women. It really is. I want to back up too with the stimulants. This is not a pass to lose weight, by the way. I want to be real clear with that because there are some huge negative side effects that can happen. And going on, we see some other illicit drugs that are used in pretty high numbers here in California where it comes to marijuana, LSD, narcotics such as heroin, morphine, codeine. You may have heard of oxycodone, hydrocodone. These are all narcotics, all opioid narcotics that are generally prescribed for moderate to severe pain, and they can be easily abused. I mean, some of this stuff goes for like $30 a pop on the street. I once had a prescription for something called Nucenta, and it's right under, I think, morphine. I had a neurological problem when I was in Alabama, and I actually took one when I was at work, and one of my students came in and said, "Oh, is that X, Y, and Z?" And I said, "Yeah, it is." He said, "Oh, those goes for $60 a pop on the street." So these things are commonly abused, and we have to be very careful about what we put in our bodies because the concentrations of these drugs compared to what else you're taking, they can have some contradictions. Illicit drug use is huge. I'm going to skip over this one because it's just a breakdown of how people mix illicit drugs with alcohol, etc. And I want to really move on to some of the more important facts with who uses illicit drugs. We're pushing half of Americans over the age of 12 have at least tried something. Almost 10% of adults have tried an illicit drug just in the past month. So every month running, 10% try it. And some of these things are trends. Y'all, I don't even want to get started on, I don't know what this post-millennial generation is doing with the consumption of Tide Pods. And there's something called pill parties where they go raid their parents' medicine cabinets and they just take 3, 4, 5 pills, something that your parents won't even really miss. They go to these pill parties or farm parties, what they're called. They throw everything in a big bowl. They mix it up and then they just take a handful and throw it in their mouth and swallow in water. And whatever you get is what you get. I've never experienced anything so absurd in my life. This is what's happening. And so we have to be concerned about our children and where they're going because these are the generational trends that are happening. Tide Pods, y'all. When I was a kid, we just sniffed magic markers. Okay. We just smelled isopropyl alcohol and got a high off of that. Now people are actually ingesting Tide Pods and Ajax and ridiculous things. So it's actually getting completely asinine. It's not just illicit drugs that you find on the street. People are sniffing household products. They're snorting in pill form. They're crushing pills and snorting the drugs that their parents are getting from the hospitals. And so we have to be very careful because once again, ladies, it causes a much more detrimental effect on our bodies. And some of the physiological effects, I'm just going to skip over this one, go all the way to the bottom where we talk about psychedelics and hallucinogens. Some of these things, particularly some of our drugs that are prescribed for depression and anxiety, a lot of these drugs, if they don't give you an antipsychotic with it, will have you seeing things. My mother was a cancer patient for a long time, and she was on so many drugs, and they were making her have hallucinations. And she would say, oh, there's a green man in a closet over there. And I'm saying, Mama, ain't jack squat in the closet. But she saw a green dragon or a green man. And so some of these drugs that they give us, even if it's supposed to benefit us, the side effects of the drug can cause hallucinogens. They can cause all sorts of things. And so that's another reason why many times you'll be prescribed an antipsychotic with these things. But these are also some of the impacts that they have: altered perceptions, reality, mood, heart rate, body temperature, anxiety. The list just goes on and on and on. And I'm going to skip over because we've talked about some of those already. Now, for the prescription drugs that are most commonly abused, are all of our stimulants, such as Adderall is not on there, but it is basically what Ritalin is. And they can be given for sleep disorders, narcolepsy. It's very rarely given for obesity, almost never, because of the high rate of abuse. Our depressants, Valium, Xanax, those things go for fairly cheap on the street, $10 a pop. That's pretty economical when you don't want to go see a therapist yourself, or you don't want to be technically prescribed anything or technically diagnosed because you want to hold on to whatever position it is you have. But the opioids are very common. Oxycodone, Percocet. We have hydrocodone. There's Tylenol with codeine. The list goes on and on and on. Now they're no longer giving, I forget which one it is, but people were overdosing off of the Tylenol content. So they took it down. I think it was hydrocodone, and now they're doing a little bit of a different blend of ingredients and concentrations because people were actually overdosing on hydrocodone. So now oxycodone, codeine, T3, all of these, Percocet, and I have neurological issues, so I pretty much have a lot of this stuff in my medicine cabinet, and it does cause some impacts on the body where your body, if you take it for too long, you really can start to develop dependency. And so you have to be very, very tailored and taking it only when you need it, because you do want to be able to function without basically being a drug addict your entire life. Drug dependency. I'm going to skip over this a little bit because I think that I've covered it enough in this lecture already. But what I do want to talk about here is if you know someone with a drug addiction problem. It's really important that we seek counseling and professional help. Drug problems, addiction problems, alcohol, tobacco, whatever it is, are often caused by some sort of mental problem as well, or high stress incident that impacted mental capacity or mental health. And we need to stop ostracizing this as well. People's depression and their stress factors are manifested differently. Some of us become alcoholics. Some of us become drug addicts. Some of us drop out of school. Some of us quit our jobs. Some of us, we take a vacation and you ain't gonna hear from us in the next 3 months. But some people turn to drug and alcohol abuse, and it's the same problem. It just manifested itself differently. And this is one of the biggest reasons why women particularly have to be careful when it comes to postpartum depression. Even if it's not postpartum depression, raising kids is very difficult. Trying to raise kids, go to work, go to school, do all of these things, it can be overwhelming because from a traditional point of view, we have not shared the roles, or we're not getting help with household duties. So we actually are stressing out more when it comes to work and taking care of kids. And sometimes these things can manifest themselves in the form of drug or alcohol abuse. So these are some resources that you can call, you can use. If you need help, if you're recovering, it's okay. There's always relapses. The same thing happens with weight loss. People relapse. Sometimes it takes them 4, 5, 6 tries to lose weight. And the same thing can be said for drug and alcohol addiction. So I encourage you guys to seek help if you need it, and I hope you found this presentation informative.